TV7 Israel News is made possible thanks to your generous donations. Shalom, good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcast to you from Jerusalem. Israel is giving diplomacy a final chance ahead of a looming high-intensity offensive against the Islamist Hamas throughout the Gaza Strip. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz asserts Berlin's support for Israel's war on Hamas while urging Jerusalem to uphold its humanitarian obligation. French President Emmanuel Macron hosts Syria's de-facto leader Muhammad al-Julani in breach of EU, UN, and US sanctions. Israel is giving diplomacy a final chance as it continues to prepare for a high-intensity offensive against the Islamist Hamas aimed at fulfilling all of Jerusalem's war objectives, the retrieval of all 59 hostages who've endured 580 days in Hamas captivity, eradicating the Islamist Hamas's military and governing capabilities in the Gaza Strip, and ensuring that the Palestinian terror group never again poses a threat to Israel. Jerusalem is reportedly waiting for Hamas' response to a revised outline that Egyptian mediators submitted to it. According to the outline, some of the hostages are to be released immediately in exchange for an American guarantee that talks will be held to discuss a permanent ceasefire as of the first day of the outline's execution. Last night, during a swearing-in ceremony at the White House, U.S. President Donald Trump spoke of developments in the negotiations to renew the ceasefire in Gaza and to secure the hostages' release.
Well, we're going to see what's happening. There's a lot of talk going on about Gaza right now. You know that, right? So you'll be knowing probably in the next 24 hours.
Meanwhile, in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in a post on social media, acknowledged President Donald Trump's remark earlier this week, in which he noted that only 21 out of the 59 Israeli hostages are certainly alive.
Look, we know for certain that 21 are alive. That's not in dispute. There are 3 others where, unfortunately, it's uncertain whether they're alive. So the definite number we're stating is 21. We're not giving up on anyone, not on the 3, and not on any of the others. We want to bring them all home.
Meanwhile, in Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz held its first joint press conference since the latter seized the reins of power in Berlin, during the course of which the German leader emphasized his country's support for the State of Israel in its war against the Islamist Hamas. Nevertheless, amid growing humanitarian strain on the Gazan population, Chancellor Merz urged Israel to uphold its humanitarian obligation towards the unaffected civilian population.
We stand by Israel without ifs and buts. We fully understand the need to protect ourselves against Hamas terrorism. But once again, the Israeli government also has a humanitarian obligation towards the unaffected civilian population, the children, the elderly, the men and women who are suffering from this Hamas terror in the Gaza Strip just as much as the country of Israel has in recent years, especially since October 7, 2023. So Israel must assume this responsibility. I think I can also say that it must fulfill it more than in recent days.
It is important to know that while Israel did uphold its humanitarian responsibility in accordance with Article 23 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, the aid was effectively seized by Hamas, that subsequently abused the aid by selling it to the local population of Gaza with a surplus of taxes and utilizing the funds to pay new recruits to join its ranks to fight Israel. Therefore, in accordance with the letter of the law, Israel decided to cease entry of aid until after it alters the situation on the ground that would allow it to guarantee the controlled distribution of aid to the non-combatant population of the Gaza Strip. Yet, French President Macron, after speaking about his support for Israel since October 7th of 2023 in its fight against Hamas, disregards the letter of the law, insinuating instead that Israel was not abiding by, quote, any humanitarian rules.
Nous avons été aux côtés d'Israël le 7 octobre.
We stood with Israel on October 7th and condemned the Hamas terrorist attack. We are fighting tirelessly for the release of all hostages, but also because Israel is a democracy and because we have our own principles, and because we cannot have double standards and be so committed in Ukraine on the principle of the right of people to their own territory and sovereignty, and not have double standards when it comes to Gaza. And therefore fighting against a terrorist group, which is Hamas, yes, but not respecting any humanitarian rules and maintaining the situation in Gaza's no. And this situation is unacceptable, in the same way that forced displacement of a population is an unacceptable response.
De même que les déplacements forcés de population sont une réponse inacceptable.
After the conclusion of his meeting with Chancellor Merz, French President Emmanuel Macron hosted Syria's de facto president Ahmed al-Shara, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, in seeming defiance of a U.S. State Department designation of al-Shara as a specially designated global terrorist with a price of $10 million on his head, in addition to UN Security Council Resolution 1267 that designated al-Shara a terrorist with active sanctions that include a travel ban set out in paragraphs 1b and 89b of Resolution 2734, and a European Union designation, which among others stipulates that the UN ban on al-Julani's entry would be, quote, binding and directly applicable in all member states. Nevertheless, despite being in direct breach of both European and international law, the French leader blatantly asserted that he intends to force the European Union to change the sanctions on al-Julani and to convince the United States to do the same if the HTS regime in Damascus continues on its path, which President Macron regards as positive.
La communauté internationale doit donc être au rendez-vous.
The international community needs to play its part.
Nous ferions le nôtre.
That's why I told the president that if he continues along his path, then we'll continue along ours, first by continuing the progressive lifting of European sanctions, second by working in line with our convictions with our American partners so that they too take the same approach, and finally by working with the UNHCR and our partners on a regional framework which would allow Syria to see the return of its talents and its people. I think it's in everyone's interests, including the interests of the Americans, to reflect on or rather to act to accompany us in lifting the sanctions on the Syrian people, to allow the comeback to happen faster, to rebuild and to welcome home the refugees faster, and to put off withdrawing their forces as long as possible because there remains a security issue.
La question sécuritaire demeure.
It is important to highlight that a week before the meeting between Macron and al-Julani, French shipping and logistics group CMA-CGM signed a 30-year deal with the interim Damascus regime that includes building a new berth at Latakia port and investing another 230 million euros, equal to approximately $260 million, over the course of the partnership. Interestingly enough, CMA-CGM, which had paid in the past $374 and $400 over 24 violations of U.S. sanctions involving weapon smuggling by Iran, Sudan, and Cuba, began managing Latakia's container terminal in 2009 under now ousted Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad. The contract was most recently renewed in October of 2024, also under President al-Assad, for 30 more years, which was now renewed by the al-Julani regime. Meanwhile, in Paris, Syria's de facto leader, al-Shara, addressed reports of indirect negotiations between his regime and Israel via the United Arab Emirates.
As for the indirect negotiations, the negotiations with Israel, there are indirect negotiations taking place through mediators to calm the situation and try to absorb the situation so that things do not reach a point where both parties lose control. Israel's military interventions are random interventions, and Israel's interventions broke the law of the 1974 agreement. Since our arrival in Damascus, we have declared to all concerned parties that Syria is committed to the 1974 agreement.
It is important to know that al-Julani deliberately twists the facts. The exchange of information between Israel and his HTS government relates merely to messages that were relayed by Jerusalem to Damascus and vice versa, with regard to warnings not to harm Syria's Druze and Christian minorities south of Damascus. Moreover, Israel expressed its red lines with regard to HTS and other jihadist terror groups from entrenching militarily south of the Syrian capital. Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News. I would like to urge you to take a moment to pray for the hostages who've endured 580 days in Hamas captivity. Pray also for the peace of Jerusalem and salvation of Israel. And separately, if you've been blessed by TV7 Israel, which is exclusively funded by our viewers, please consider supporting our productions. You can donate via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. I'm Jonathan Hassan, wishing you an Erev Mevorach, and God willing, we'll see you during our next update. Until then, Shalom from Jerusalem.